Welcome back to Mystery Rift, everyone. I'm your host, and today we're diving back into territory that's become all too familiar lately. Unexplained disappearances. Specifically, those concerning people, young and older, where the case is a genuine, frustrating whodunit. You know how much I value finding the logic in these cases, but sometimes the void simply refuses to yield its secrets. Now, many of you know I've spoken with investigators on past shows, and I've told you they've been very cooperative. I even once had one greet me with a strange, "Oh, you're your Dave, right?" How he knew me, I still don't know, but he did. These interactions reinforce the disturbing reality that these professionals are just as baffled as we are when the evidence simply evaporates. From this point forward, the three main cases we're discussing today are rooted in the wilderness. But you must understand something critical. The missing 411 profile, the specific strange patterns we see, it can happen anywhere. I've written extensively about individuals who vanished in the middle of cities, proving the pattern transcends setting. Don't be confused or think I'm stretching things by mentioning an urban parallel. The underlying factors remain chillingly consistent. Today, we start in the wilds, where the natural world often cloaks the unnatural. Without any further delay, we begin with the first case. It's a tough one to wrap your head around. Folks, a scenario so simple it becomes deeply, profoundly unsettling. We are forced to consider if something truly anomalous is at play in these remote locales. Charles Kaiser, the man's name was Charles Kaiser, 72 years old, reportedly in good shape. He went missing on September 29, 2022, at 1:30 in the afternoon. Charles was a retired estimator, a large man who loved the outdoors, making his disappearance especially confounding. This wasn't some tenderfoot lost in the brush. This was an experienced man simply vanishing from a clear path. He and a friend decided to take a trip through Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. Their journey began outside of Lander, Wyoming, a city whose name has, unfortunately, become synonymous with the unexplainable in my files. They were headed to the Blue Ridge Lookout, accessible via a dirt road with just a half-mile hike to the top. The trail was famously straightforward, a singular path in and out. Charles and his buddy arrived. Since it was a warm afternoon, the friend was taking a few minutes to pack his bag, exercising common sense. He told Charles, "Hey, I'll meet you up at the lookout. It's only a half-mile away." To which Charles replied, "Okay." They knew the trail was clear, one way up, one way down, making getting lost almost an impossibility. The friend started hiking, maybe 30 minutes behind Charles. He figured Charles was already at the top, enjoying the vista. But when he arrived, there was no sign of Charles. Charles had no dementia, no known health issues, and no directional problems. His friend searched the peak, blew his whistle, and yelled out, but all he got in return was a crushing silence. In my opinion, even with a half-hour gap on a half-mile trail, they should have been able to hear each other's shouts. The friend called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office at 1:30 p.m. A deputy arrived, and they walked up, yelling and even activating the patrol car's siren, which carries a long way in that country. Lander, Wyoming sits near an area I've always found super hinky-winky weird, a landscape dotted with tons of little lakes which often seem to cluster around disappearance zones. A bloodhound was brought in quickly. The dog took Charles's scent, went a little way up the path toward the lookout, and then simply stopped. It just stood there, unable to proceed, as if a glass wall had dropped into the middle of the trail. A full search and rescue operation was authorized. Trailers started showing up, and quickly. But at 7 p.m. that night, the already strange situation was compounded when the weather violently turned, becoming frigid cold. In late September in Wyoming, nature often acts as an accelerant to the mystery, rapidly erasing any hope of survival for the unprepared. The next day, 40 searchers arrived, along with dog teams and a helicopter equipped with FLIR. The dogs worked for 2 hours that morning, the first ones out, finding nothing. They deployed ATVs, equestrians, and ground pounders. Still, no success. The lack of any sign, especially with cutting-edge heat-sensing technology, suggests the man was either deeply concealed or, chillingly, no longer on the surface. The case struck a chord back home in Michigan, The owner of Charles's old company flew out in his private plane to join the search. It's a genuine show of human kindness, as was the local company that fed the 40 to 50 people searching every day. A refreshing contrast to the cold mystery unfolding in the mountains. By October 2nd, the searchers were completely confused. There were no other trails, no logical deviation point. Why would a man who knew the drill simply step off the path and vanish? The search continued for 11 days, involving 200 total personnel, from cadaver dogs to SAR teams from multiple counties. 11 days of relentless searching yielded nothing. It has been 3 years, and they still haven't found Charles Kaiser. A simple half-mile walk in a nondescript area became an unsolvable puzzle. This man disappeared as cleanly and completely as a puff of smoke. The unseen divide now. Let me talk about the Lander area again. I drove up that road to investigate an older, very famous case. Amy Beckel, who went missing in 1997. If you follow the road near Lander, you hit a large marsh, a strange, wet expanse that doesn't show up clearly on maps, acting like a natural blind spot. Amy had parked right next to this marsh. Years later, a fisherman found her watch, her actual watch, on a sandbar way down in the river, in the middle of absolute nowhere. Conventional wisdom suggested abduction on the highway, but how could a kidnapper's vehicle have dropped a watch deep in the river, miles from the nearest clear access point? The marsh holds a secret connection to that river. Angie and I were walking this isolated dirt road that parallels the marsh, a place of profound silence. It was so quiet, I felt compelled to test the environment. I took my cupped hands and clapped twice. Boom! Boom! That was our conscious, measurable input into the quiet. About 3 or 4 seconds later, a sound like a herd of buffalo came tearing right at us from behind the thick, marshy bushes. We braced ourselves behind the car, expecting a bison stampede. We were in Wyoming, after all. This immense, powerful sound lasted about 5 seconds. Then, as fast as it started, it suddenly stopped. There was no dust cloud, no rustling of brush, nothing. It instantly reverted back to the deep, oppressive quiet. We both looked at each other, realizing that was not normal. It felt less like a natural occurrence and more like an intentional, unseen force displaying a burst of raw, territorial power. Whatever happened out there to Charles Kaiser and Amy Beckel, I'm convinced it's related. That marshy area, coupled with the profound silence, may serve as a veil, a breach point in the natural world. The sudden phantom noise we experienced could have been a sign of something ancient, something that views the lost and the alone as prey. Carol Parkins, our second case, involves a woodsman, Carol Parkins, 78 years old. He was a retired logger, a lifetime hunter, and an expert in the wilderness who was very comfortable in the woods. He went missing on April 22, 2023, while out shed hunting, looking for discarded elk and deer antlers. He didn't check in with his family, which was highly unusual. Around midnight, his children found his locked truck in a pullout near Horse Creek Road in Oregon. The area was a recent burn zone and, critically, had no cell phone signal. This is a combination often found in these cases: isolation, destruction, and a lack of modern communication. Search and rescue immediately went out. The dogs tracked his scent right next to the river, where he logically would have walked. The search was massive, utilizing drones, 50 ground pounders, and multiple dog teams from various SAR groups. The river itself was rolled by outfitters multiple times. Thousands of personnel hours were spent. Carol knew that area. He knew that all he had to do was walk downhill, and he would return to his starting point. If he'd had a medical event, cadaver dogs should have located him easily. Yet, searchers went back multiple times in the months after, and they never found him. This is another example of someone who did not walk out of the search zone and should have been found. The lack of any trail, the scent stopping dead at the water's edge, suggests a baffling conclusion. What if the water wasn't an obstacle but a portal? In cases like this, we must consider the unconventional. What if the creek, a natural boundary, was the place where the physical and the subtle planes meet? The burn zone, where the land has been cleansed by fire, might allow for a temporary, fleeting access point to another state of being. The scent stopping at the river could mean Carol Parkins didn't go along the water, but stepped beyond it. Darren Dixon, our final case, is a rabbit pulled from the hat. Darren Dixon, 20 years old, a pure athlete who went missing on July 4, 1993, from Yellowstone National Park. His name was never on the official missing persons list I received, making the case even more suspect from the start. Darren was a track and field athlete who worked as a busboy at Roosevelt Lodge for his second summer. He was a passionate trout fisherman. In June '93, he wrote home about finding a great spot and catching 10 fish in an hour. He lived for fishing, taking advantage of every minute off. On July 2nd, he quit his job at the lodge for an unknown reason, which is highly uncharacteristic for someone who returned for a second season. He drove out of the park to meet friends. On July 4th, he left them and drove to an area he had fished in the past. His friends expected him back that night. When he failed to return, they called the National Park Service, NPS, on July 5th. On July 6th, the NPS reported finding his car parked in a pullout in the Lamar River Canyon. This is a fast-moving, dangerous river in July, the last place a smart fisherman would cast a line. The NPS brought dogs which tracked right to the river. They searched the banks and flew a helicopter, assuming his body was in the water. They found nothing. His father, bewildered, stated that the park officials told him he must be in the river, which, as I've told you before, is often what they say when they have no answers at all. The NPS was officially quoted as being unable to determine what happened. They told the parents one story and the press another. The truth, which only appeared in a single obscure article, was that his car was found not in the dangerous Lamar River Canyon, but up a dirt road following a tributary called Slough Creek. Darren had parked outside the Slough Creek campground, likely planning to fish the quieter, safer tributary, exactly what a seasoned fisherman would do. The dogs tracking to the river was irrelevant. That's where any fisherman would first scope out the water. The 12-day search found no gear, no clothing, and no trace of him, despite the nearby campground having witnesses who, strangely, saw nothing. Darren was a deeply religious young man, helping with the Christian ministry inside Yellowstone. This makes the possibility of a calculated, conscious disappearance highly unlikely. Why was the Park Service so evasive about the true location? When the precise facts are withheld, there is always a compelling reason. I cannot be convinced he went in that creek. He was too smart, too cautious. What if the reluctance to name Slough Creek is because it's known to be one of the national park's thin spots? A location where the barrier between our world and the place of the lost is unusually weak, allowing something to easily claim a victim. My guess is that Darren is now listed by the Park Service as missing and presumed deceased. This is how they quietly erase him from the rolls. We only found this case by pure luck, and the systemic obfuscation surrounding the location suggests the Park Service may know more than they let on about the nature of these disappearances. Conclusion: these three cases, Charles Kaiser, Carol Parkins, and Darren Dixon, are united by a sudden, silent void that swallowed them whole, often near a suspicious natural boundary like a river or a marsh. The unyielding mystery in the face of massive search efforts suggests a deeper, potentially extra-dimensional factor at play. Please, share this video on your social media. Help us spread awareness about these unnerving patterns that defy explanation. And finally, I must mention the Kickstarter for Missing 411 National Parks. We need your help to make this movie. If all of you who watch this, only 3% have contributed so far, could contribute even $5, we would get there. It's a race against the clock. We want to make this movie. I've already started writing the storyline. That's how dedicated I am to this project. Your support will help us shine a light on these unsolved cases. $5 goes a long way. Thank you so much to those who have contributed. In the meantime, be safe. Be kind to people. Kindness is free and it's like karma. It'll come around and come back to you. Polytess out.